You're listening to Passions and Prologues, a literary podcast where each week I'll interview an author about a thing they love and how it inspires their work. I'm your host, Adam Sokol, and if this is your first time joining in, so happy to have you here. If you've been here since the beginning, thanks for coming back. This is a really wonderful conversation I had with Judith Lindbergh. Judith is the author of a book that is coming out in a bit of a while from now. It's called Akmaral, but that is not what we discussed today. Judith is also the creator of the Writer's Circle, which is a really phenomenal creative writing community. They build out workshops both in person and online for people who are in the writing community, who have been writing for years and years and years, or have never written even a poem or a story and they want to try. It is for all ages. It is extremely inclusive, and it really tears down those gatekeeping walls that people can feel about the writing community. And so in this discussion, we talk about the creation of the Writer's Circle, what creative writing really has meant to this community, and how it got started. And how it really got started was her discussions with a number of young children about being creative and not setting boundaries on yourself and just learning how to build out stories. So in keeping with the theme of recent episodes, this discussion is all about just those different ways that stories can come from anywhere. So I think you'll really, really enjoy this discussion. Before we get into that, I want to remind everybody, you can always email me at passionsandprologues@gmail.com. I can give you book recommendations if you leave a 5-star rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also send me the things that you are passionate about. I love seeing all of the responses that you've sent in so far. As a reminder, I give out a randomized bookshop.org gift card at the end of every month to one random person who sends me an email with their passions. Again, it's just something that I'm really, really loving reading. So thank you all who have done that already. And thank you all in advance for anyone who will do it moving forward. There is there's a book that I would like to tell you guys all about before we get into this. And my book recommendation for this week is actually going to be Red Rising by Pierce Brown. The Red Rising series is very, very popular. It came out a while back. I believe there's like 6 games now. It is honestly really perfect for anyone who loves it. Came out around the time of like the Hunger Games. So like the way that it was promoted was like for fans of the Hunger Games or Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. But really, it is this really phenomenally interesting fantasy / sci-fi. I guess it's more science fiction for sure. But it is a story. The first book is set on Mars, and it's this kind of intersperse of this caste system and this legendary institute that kind of provides the caste system for all of these different characters. And our main character, Darrow, is what is known very, very close to basically a slave. Like they live under the ground. They are toiling, trying to make Mars a livable and sustainable place for people to live for future generations. And the twists in this book are just incredible. I really think you're going to love it. And yeah, so that is Red Rising. It's a perfect book for the end of the year because it is a series. If you have, like me, some time off coming up for the winter holidays, you can dive into the Red Rising books, really cozy up by a fire with a nice mug of tea or coffee or eggnog and enjoy Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Okay, that is all the housekeeping for me. Again, I am so excited for you to hear everything about the Writer's Circle from Judith Lindbergh. I will put links in the show notes if you are interested in checking out some of their workshops and classes. Really interesting stuff. You can learn all about their instructors, any events that they're doing. Yeah, highly recommend it. So I hope you enjoy this discussion with Judith Lindbergh on Passions and Prologues. Okay, Judith, kick us off by letting me know what is the thing you're super passionate about that we're going to discuss today.
I am super passionate about creativity in all its incarnations. I mean, I'm here because of the Writer's Circle and writing, but actually my life has always been based in creativity. I started my professional career as a dancer, and I did that for about 7 years and thought I would do that for my whole life, but dance doesn't work that way. not even a little. And then I was an actor for several years in New York City, which was more challenging because my life was filled with dance credits and theater. You know, they're like, oh, you want to do Shakespeare, but you can do pirouettes? I don't understand. And then I started writing, and writing was the wonderful thing about writing is that you can do it anywhere. And you don't need someone to hire you to do it. You can just pick up a piece of paper and a pen. You can be in the woods, or you can be, you know, sneaking writing at your desk when you're in an office job, which has happened. And you can own it. It can be yours no matter what. And I felt like, wow, that was really a different experience when I started writing basically on the job. And I found myself, you know, discovering the power of being able to be creative without anybody else needing me to do it for them.
I really love that. And because you're absolutely right. It's along the same lines as one of my passions in addition to writing is running. I love running. And there's this concept about it that I've always enjoyed where it's like, if I have a pair of shoes, I can go do the thing I love. I don't, like you said, from a sports standpoint, like I don't need a team. I don't need a ball. I don't need a hoop. I don't need anything. If I have a pair of shoes, I can go do this. And I think where I want to start is, you mentioned being a dancer and then getting into acting. Like the nice thing about writing, like you said, once you start, you're writing, you're a writer technically. So, you know, how does one go from, okay, I want to begin writing and then like kind of having it blossom out into a very integral part of your life. So like, how did you go from I'm going to start writing to it's something that I'm going to spend a lot of time with?
Well, going back to those, you know, clandestine typing opportunities. Back when I was doing that, I started by writing to all my friends. And this is a while ago. And there were actually letters with stamps and envelopes, the whole deal. And I would write letters to my friends, and I would go on for pages and pages. And then I'd run out of all the friends that I had not written to recently. And so I started writing poetry, and I started writing little stories. And I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of fun. It keeps me busy while I'm, you know, sitting here being bored. And honestly, one of the stories kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And I was like, oh, what is this? I think I'm writing a novel. And I had no expectation. There was no, you know, that was not the plan. I was not setting out to make this new career change, literally. And I sort of kept following that crazy track until I wrote a novel, and took quite a few years. And it was a terrible novel, and it never got published. And I'm very grateful that it never got published. But I learned how to write. And so that's sort of like all of a sudden an idea for me just blossomed.
It's, you know, it's so interesting because I've interviewed hundreds of authors, and I used to wonder years and years ago before I started pursuing becoming a published author myself, like that was the part where I always was like, how do you find an idea that you want to stick with for so long? And I wrote 80,000 words of a manuscript and abandoned it because thankfully 80,000 words, but I realized kind of like what you said about like you finished a novel and you're like, this is not good. This is not, I kind of realized that before I'd fully finished it. And then I started working on a second one, and I loved it, and I finished it, and I'm querying it now. And you're right. Like it is one of those things where people, actually my mom who listens to this, so I'm sure she'll hear this. She read my completed book, and she's like, how do you have ideas like this in your brain? How do you have all this in your brain? And I was like, well, honestly, I don't have all of it in my brain at once. It's like that morning's 1,200 words I had in my brain, it then figured out from there. So yeah. I definitely know what you mean about like, oh, I just kept going and going.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't have it all in your brain. I mean, honestly, the story tells you what it wants to do a lot of the time. Although I have to say that first novel, and I'm a very OCD kind of person. I organize everything, and everything has to be planned. Back then, I'm much looser now. And I outlined, when I figured out that I was writing a novel, I said, okay, wait, stop, figure out what this book is. And I outlined the whole thing. Like almost down to the scene. It was obscene, the crazy thing I did. And then I would go and I was like, okay, now I know what the novel is. I'm going to write the first chapter or the next chapter. And I'd write, and the book, and it would do things that I hadn't planned. And I'm like, wait a second. And then I'd go back and I'd revise the outline. And what an idiot. And I spent so much time, but I was literally understanding the process through this sort of, it wants to do what it wants to do. And you have to listen to it. And then over many years, and I've written 4 novels now and 2, anyway, the thing I've learned is you do need those guideposts. You need those anchors along the way. And then but you don't need an outline. Like if you detail outline, I think you just sort of strangle your creativity. So when I teach, I often teach kids on the floor, and we have this crazy multicolored rug. And I'm like, okay, on the crazy multicolored rug, over here in this flower is the place that the story begins. And over here on this, tree on the rug, that's where the story is going to end. And there's all these other spots on the rug that you have to get to, but you don't have a road. And the road is what you're going to figure out while you're writing. And I find that that's a much better approach than, what I used to do.
Yeah, well, because I feel like when you're sitting, at least for me, it's like when I couldn't sleep in the middle of the night, I'm not thinking, like you said, I'm not thinking like these 2 characters interact and have this conversation for 2 pages. No, it's like you think about these big, like, tent poles that you need to get to.
Yeah.
And then when you wake up in the morning, or when you sit down to write, you do, like you said, you write the journey, and if you amble and you wander around, like, you can tighten it up after the fact, but you just have to get from point A to point B eventually. And so, speaking of point A to point B, how does one go from wanting to write, wanting to be creative, starting to write, to creating your own writing community, the writer's circle, which we're going to get into? So, like, how does one go from that point to point B?
Okay. So, first novel, terrible, didn't get published, thank the universe. Second novel, many years, a lot of work, did get published, and rather spectacularly at the time. So I got this really lovely editor at Viking who took on my book and did a wonderful job with it. And also the advance was enough that I could quit the job that I was clandestine writing at. Yeah. And so that was really freeing, because I could get out of the day job sort of cycle. And it went on for quite a few years. But because I'm a slow, careful writer and tend to write historical fiction, which requires a great deal of research, I'm not kind of popping out a book every year and a half. So eventually the advance ran out, and I said, oh dear, I have to make a living. And at the time, my kids were little, and I was at home, and I didn't want to have to commute back into New York City, which is where I used to work. And I said, what can I do that'll keep me close to home and keep me involved in writing and still, make a little bit of money? So I had already been working once a week, teaching a class at a local community school for adults, mostly because I was desperate to talk to other adults about something other than where to get great deals on diapers. Sure. So it was just sort of like, okay, I'm leaving the house for 2 hours. So I'll see you guys later. And I thought, but at the same time, my kids were growing into very active young children. And there was a lot of imaginative play in my house. I was the kind of mom that let her kids wear costumes everywhere, no matter what time of day or year.
Sure. Yeah.
And see, I don't think it's weird either.
I have nieces and nephews. Many of them have worn the same, princess dresses and things like that everywhere they go. Or absolutely 100% fully support this.
Yeah. So we had knights in shining armor, and we were superheroes, and we just walk around town, and all the kids would come into the backyard and play these crazy games. And then school came along, and my kids started to get the homework assignments that required them to follow instructions. So one of these is one of my sons came home with an instruction to write an essay. And the first sentence had to have very specific information, and the second sentence had to have some other specific. And it was sort of like a fill in the blanks thing. And I said, this is a writing assignment. This is not how writers think. This is not how writers work. And it's not asking for any inquiry. It's not asking for any creativity of thought or, engagement. And I talked to a lot of his friends and his friends' parents, and they all said, yeah, my kids hated writing once they got to school. When they were little, they loved it and they make up stories and draw pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got to school and they're like, I can't do this. I have to do it their way. Yeah. And I said, oh, I can fix this. So I took the crazy kids in the backyard and I sat them down on the floor in my house, or eventually I rented a little space nearby. And I said, we're going to take all those crazy adventures you're having in the backyard as superheroes and knights in shining armor. We're going to write the story. Mm-hmm. And that was how the Writer's Circle started, because I wanted to teach them how to be creative.
See, you are the right kind of teacher. This is fantastic. You're absolutely, it's the same thing of like, why don't kids like to read? It's because you're handing a 12-year-old, the Canterbury Tales as opposed to like a Jason Reynolds novel. Like, let them read what they want to read. Yeah. Let them write the stories they want to write. And instead of, I understand why it's important to learn how to write a research paper eventually and like how to cite things.
Exactly.
But to structure a young kid's mind, like the expansion of like, you should write stories. I'm getting on a soapbox in agreement with you here. It's like, you should write stories that expand your worldview, not like narrow them to, well, this is the way that F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote his. So you an 8-year-old needs to focus. It's like,
exactly. I mean, also there's so much emphasis on, argumentative writing or, various academic requests. Mm-hmm. And kids want to write about explosions and mermaids and magic and dragons. And they, so with the kids, in fact, the Writer's Circle has this freedom of expression policy that all the parents sign when they sign up, when you fill out the forms. And we let our kids write about anything that they want to. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if it's what schools would call inappropriate, or if it's, scatological, or if it's, because you're right. You don't want to box their little brains in. They're so creative and they're so open to everything. And we just, keep shoving them down this narrow path of you have to be this way to function in life. Life functioning happens all by itself.
Right.
And when you give kids permission to express their own thoughts and their own ideas, even if they, a lot of the time with the little kids, the stories don't make any sense at all. And I spend a lot of time critiquing, saying, why did your character do that? What were they thinking? Mm-hmm. And eventually they can verbalize. And I'm like, okay, we need to get all that on the page because you completely skipped that. Mm-hmm. But they really do. They have great imaginations. They are so curious. And if we just invite curiosity, we can get them to write.
Mm-hmm. So walk me through expanding the Writer's Circle beyond that first group of little ones writing whatever's in their minds.
Exactly. So it did start with kids because that was kind of where my brain was at. I had little kids, so therefore everyone was focusing on little kids. But about a year in, and I was still teaching that once a week class. Yeah. About a year in, a woman I really didn't know named Michelle Cameron, who lives nearby, but she was an author that I knew through a variety of different organizations. And she called me and said, I want to hear about the Writer's Circle because I'm kind of looking for something like that myself. And so we got together and had a conversation. And she was very clear right away. She said, I want to be your partner. And I'm like, I just met you. Slow down. Slow down. But within 15 minutes of leaving our first meeting, she had found a location near where she was to hold classes for the Writer's Circle in her area. And our whole idea was we want a little outlet here and a little outlet there, and all the local writers can teach like 10 minutes from their house, and it'll be much better for us to be able to do what we need to do and still teach. And I didn't want everyone, commuting and going through that whole thing. And so Michelle started working with us and with me. There was no us at that time. And teaching some kids classes. And she said pretty quickly, she's like, there's more adult market than you think. And I said, no. Nobody spends money on themselves. They all just spend them on their kids. They don't have time. Clearly, I'm reflecting my perspective on this. And so she and I started thinking about bringing on more teachers and teaching more adult classes. And in fact, it completely blew up into this massive thing. I had no plan. I thought, I'll just teach until I sell my next book. Ha, ha, ha. And it blew up all by itself through no, intention of our own. We had no marketing planning. We had no business plan. We're just like, oh, this interesting person, let's go meet them for lunch. Oh yeah, you want to teach? And one of the things about the Writers' Circle is everybody who teaches for us is a published author. Whether they are publishing essays and short stories and poetry, or if they are lucky enough to have had a big 5 traditional book published like me and Michelle, whatever we bring to our work as teachers is from experience. And in fact, often we have people who have education and teacher background, but no publishing, they come to us and we're like, thank you, but that's not what we're looking for. We really want writers who understand what writing's about. And we really look for creativity. And we also look for generosity of spirit.
That was the part I was going to ask about, because I assume in chatting with you, like I can feel the importance of, like we were talking about before, like not hindering creativity, and the importance of having writing be seen as an open space without gatekeepers. And so I imagine you need to be looking for very, not specific, but certain types of authors, because there are certainly published authors out there, and I won't name names to be mean, but like there are some published authors where they're just like, anything they say about the writing process, it's like, oh my God, you are, just stop it. It's not there's not some muse that comes to you at 4 a.m. exclusively and you write by candlelight with a quilt. Like it's not exclusively that. So I imagine you're looking for specific types of people who have that open mind, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know exactly what you mean. And I know some people like that, and I admire their their fortitude to work that way. But we are looking for kind of the diametric opposite. We want people who are loving and warm and embracing. We are a non-exclusive environment. Anyone who wants to take a class can come. We want our teachers I want everyone to fall in love with their students, and I want all the students to fall in love with their teachers. And, not everybody who comes to a writing class is going to publish or should publish or wants to publish. And that is not the goal. The goal is self-expression and discovering that you have something to say, and maybe a really fun and interesting way to say it, and to just learn the joy of creativity. Our method, if there is a method, is to bring the best out of every student you have. Now that best is unique to each person, and whether it's a little kid who, barely can get words on the page, or, an adult who publishes regularly. And we have people who are doing amazing things after we've been in business for 13 years. So I hope we have something to show for it after all this time. But there are people out there with novels and lots of short stories and, regular gigs at various news outlets or publishing outlets. So people who are winning prizes and all the rest.
And I'll put the link to the Writers' Circle website so that you guys can go see it. And you can, because I think the thing that I love about your website is if you go to look at the workshops, and then like they're broken out by age, but then they're also broken out. Like I want people to understand the scope of, like, Judith, you're being very modest, but I want people to understand the scope of, like, if you go to the workshops, it's not like, oh, we have an adult class with 10 people that get together once a month. Like, no. Like there's stuff for exploring memoir. There's stuff for poetry. There's science fiction. There's like all these different ages, like where to begin. There's all of these incredible courses and layouts. And so I'm wondering, like, this is a terrible question. Like, how do you go about determining like what a course can look like? Like, is it entirely up to the teacher? How do you, because it's almost like you've basically created a both virtual and in-person, like a secondary, like university type of a concept here. So like, how do you go about, I don't know, like vetting the courses and looking at that type of stuff, if that makes sense?
It does. And we're honestly very open. When we do our interviews in our teacher, engagement, we tell them right up front, we want you to bring your creativity to this class. We want you to, if you want material, we have countless curricula and exercises and prompts and materials all over the place. But if you have always wanted to teach and you want to teach this way and have this kind of approach, bring it to the class. And as long as it's presented with love and affection and we always are like, you don't criticize, you critique. And critique is a very different thing. It's an invitation to dig deeper and to find richness where it's just under the surface. Last month, for some reason, I was like, you got to dig into your pockets and find those things that you can pull out of the story that you don't really realize are there. And so we're always looking for this richness of generosity. And in the course curriculum, yes, for the little kids classes, we have a bunch of things that we say, okay, these really work. With the kids, we do crazy things like alien archaeology, which is I go into my kitchen and my various places and I find like whisks and weird things that nobody remembers what they're for. And I put them in a box and I say, you're an archaeologist and you've just landed on an alien planet and you don't know what stuff is. So you have to figure out what this culture and this species was and what they did with all this stuff. Yeah. And then they go wild and they're, shaking the whisk like it's some sort of an instrument. It's really fun. And with our adults, it's not, wild and crazy like that, but it's very open-ended. I teach a memoir class on Thursday nights that I love with these people, and everybody's coming in with lots of stories. And you don't take a memoir class unless you've got something that's happened in your life. Yeah. And, you want to be really gentle because we're dealing with very emotional, personal things. So you have to draw them out in gentle ways. Today, I'm doing my workshop this evening is about music. And I'm sure you saw the news that Christy McVie passed from Fleetwood Mac. I did. Yeah. And so, I'm of the age that I was little, but I was listening to the Rumors album. And And I'm like, okay, just putting on that album, which I did this morning on Spotify. I said, oh, wow, I am now a kid again. And I am that child. How can I help my memoir students come to that same realization? What's music might trigger that kind of experience for them? For my class, I develop curriculum. Michelle develops her own curriculum for her classes. Everybody comes in with their own objectives. We give only enough guidance as the teacher needs. If they have a student who needs particular help and they want to talk to us, that always is what we're there for. But we don't have a rubric. We don't have a goal other than that each student grows across the course's length of time. And some students stay with us for one class, one session, and then they're gone. And other people I've known since I started this. In fact, one of my students on one of my classes just this week brought out a story that I remembered from a while back. And he's like, yeah, this one I wrote in 2012. I'm like, I remember. Yeah, it's insane.
We'll be back with more Passions and Prologues after this break.
It was one of those days that I could remember it so vividly. It was like something if you heard like when John F. Kennedy was killed, you knew what you were doing. You knew what the day was like.
March 20th, 1984. That was the day I first heard about the bravest woman in the world, Phyllis Cottle, who suffered a crime so brutal it forced a city full of people to ask themselves if they could have survived or if they would have wanted to.
So to take a knife, I mean, it's almost, it's so inhuman. It's beyond anything that anybody can imagine. Stab me in the gut, stab me in the back, cut my carotid, whatever you want to, but don't do that.
I'm Carol Costello. I've been an anchor and reporter for a long time. I've covered every kind of vicious crime imaginable. Most stories I was able to leave at work, but not this one. The survivor, Phyllis Cottle, she gets under your skin and became a hero for every woman who yearned to be heard, to be taken seriously, to not only survive, but thrive. Phyllis Cottle was one badass woman, and you should know her name. Her story is coming soon to wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, back to Passions and Prologues.
I'm curious. So obviously, like I said, when people go and the links in the show notes, like when people go to look at the different workshops, there's there's things that are a little bit more focused, like I said, in specific genres or things like that. But something that I really love at the very top of the page says, where do I begin? And the reason that I love that so much is because I think about, there's so many people out there who like, they're not even ready to say like, okay, well, yeah, I want to be in a science fiction workshop. They're just like, there's just people who say like, well, I wish I wrote more, but I don't know how to get started. And I will say like, for me, the thing I struggle with is every day that I write, it makes it easier for me to write the next day. And so I just have to get into that habit forming. Like I said, when I wrote the novel that I'm querying, I wrote every single day for, I don't know, it was 5 months and it was done. And like, that was it. And so, and then I said, like, took a little break and edited it and all that fun stuff and did the querying process. And it's like, I've gotten away from writing every single day. So now every day when I wake up in the morning to try and write, it is more challenging for me because I am not writing the day before. So that's like my thing is I just say like the easiest way to write every day is to write every day. The other piece of advice that I really, really love is strangely from Seth Rogen, the actor and comedian. But he's also a screenwriter. He writes the majority of the movies that he's in, and he has a whole publication house at this point. But like his thing that he always tells people about writing, he's like, write 100 ideas down. And he goes, they can be absolutely terrible, but write 100 ideas down. And he goes, because what you're doing is you're dispelling the notion that writing needs to be some like precious thing. He's like, because if you write 100 ideas down, they're almost all going to be awful, but you're writing, you're doing something where you're putting things on the page. And so like, those are two things that I think of where I try to write every day. I try not to care so much about what I'm writing because the longer I keep from writing, the more it does feel precious to me and like holier than thou. So this is all to say, is there something for you that you think about or that you tell people when they say like, well, how do I get started? Is there like a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step? Like, is there a first step that you tell your students in the writing process?
Yeah, it's very similar. In fact, I like that idea of writing 100 ideas. One of the first exercises I do in Where Do I Begin is I have a bag of words. And this is an exercise, actually. One of my very first writing teachers was Madeleine L'Engle, who wrote A Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah,
I know. Madeleine L'Engle. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, she really was one of the very first people who I ever studied with. And one of the early classes, she passed around, it was a bowl of words that were cut out in little strips of paper. And everyone closed their eyes and picked 3. And it didn't matter which 3. And you couldn't put them back. You had to just take whatever 3 you have. And each of us looked at our 3 words. We didn't tell anyone what they were. And we had to use those 3 words in whatever it was that we were writing in the 10 or 15 minutes she gave us in class. And I still do this today. It's like the words don't have to be what the story is about, unless you want that to be. They just have to show up somewhere. And if you have to change the grammatical structure of the word to make it fit into how you're using it, you can do that. But what happens when you pick those 3 words is your brain makes these subconscious connections. If it was apple, candle, and coughing, I don't know, you could do something with that. Yeah. So your mind subconsciously connects those words and creates a setting and a relationship. And it's that subconsciousness that starts to breathe onto the page. And I also do the whole thing of Natalie Goldberg, Writing Down the Bones, where she's like, keep writing. I have my very favorite pen. It's like it's a Uniball Signo, a little micro. And she's like, write with really fast paper on a really fast pen, Or in my case, if you're using the computer, type really fast and don't correct your spelling. Don't cross anything out. Just type. No editing, no critiquing. Shut the editor off. And all of a sudden, all this stuff starts flowing. And one of the things, Natalie Goldberg's, a quote I use from her is, writing practice is the whole ocean and everything that's in it. Writing craft is directing that water into a canal and making it go a certain way. So when you're beginning, you need to work in that ocean. You need to just float around and let things toss you here and there and things drift by, and not critique and not say, I'm going to write a novel. Even though I did that in the beginning, stupid. But you really, because by allowing yourself to be less judgmental, less demanding, and less the way we're taught in school, you have to fulfill this assignment and hit all these, requirements to get a good grade. That chokes you up and leaves out all the possibilities that your subconscious can bring to the surface when you start writing that whole ocean.
Yeah.
And then eventually you got this, bunch of, I call it spit on a page. So with the little kids, I'll have a notebook and I'll say, okay, pretend, because I want this disgusting. I'm like, pretend I just spit on this page. And I said, now there's this gross glob of spit in the middle of this page. But if you hold it in the sunlight at just the right angle, there's a bubble with a rainbow on top. That's what you're looking for when you write all this stuff.
Another way to think about it is like, if you are trying to write a story of any length, you can't edit and pare down until you have it all on the page. Like you're going to go back and you're going to change stuff anyway. So don't be so judgmental. Other people are going to probably judge it at some point. Don't be judgmental about yourself in that zero draft. Like just get the words down.
Exactly. It's the shitty first draft and a lot. Yeah, exactly. And people think it's going to come out right the first time. I'm like, no, it's never going to come. That's years of work and editing and revision and polishing. And then other editors, hopefully, if you're lucky, come in and help you with it,
So along those lines, and it is a bit out, but I do still want to talk because Judith has a book coming out. It's in 2024. So we joked that we'll circle back eventually in like a year or two year and a half to talk about it. But I do want you to kind of talk about, you have a book coming out and people can learn more about it at your website, and I'll put the link in the bio there. But sort of tell me about the book that you have coming out and how it came about.
Okay. So in order to tell about that book, I should tell a little bit about the first book.
Sure.
So my first novel was The Thrall's Tale, and it was published by Viking, and it's about 3 women in Viking Age Greenland in the 10th century. And it is very, very, very literary and dark and difficult and beautiful. And I loved that book very much. But it was a challenging book, and I think the expectations that it was going to become a big seller were a little overblown. So after I wrote that book, I wanted to do a follow-up, and I did. And the book that's coming out now is that follow-up. But it took a really, really, really ridiculously long time to get published. The market changed, and my editor retired, whom I'm still very good, in touch with, and we're friends, and it's nice to have her because she's fantastic. But the new book is similarly an obscure location. I love what I call invincible landscapes and the people that live in them.
Yeah.
Because I always think I could never live that way. And therefore, how do they do it? And it just makes me go down the rabbit hole of how do they do it? And who are these people? And what do they have that I don't? And then all of a sudden I start to write a novel. So the new book is called Akmaral. And the name is Kazakhstani. It means white deer. But the book takes place in 500 BC. It's about an ancient woman, a nomad woman warrior on the Central Asian steppes. And it's based in the archaeology that actually has been discovered in that area, Kazakhstan, southern Siberia, Mongolia, of these burial chambers of women who were many of them clearly in battle. They have battle wounds and all, they're buried with weapons, and essentially they are the descendants of the Amazons who fought in the Trojan War. And it's actually historically proven, and there's DNA. And don't get me started on the archaeology stuff. Yeah. So Akmaral is a part of a small clan of warriors that are living in a nomadic setting in this beautiful landscape, which you can see on my website. It's really pretty. And things happen where things happen. That's not good. They encounter people who are much more powerful than them. And over time and through the trials of loss and the challenges of war and the understanding of what her loyalties are to her people, she becomes the leader of a much greater confederacy. And that's basically what it's about.
The only problem with this is it sounds so good and it's not coming out for a year and a half. But
I know.
I know it sounds so wonderful, and I love like deeply researched stories like this, and it makes me so excited. And honestly, like I feel like something that people can take away from this is like understanding you as an author, being someone who has done so much research for these pieces and these novels. Like that's the stuff from like the writer's circle. Like that's stuff that you can learn. Like you can, as long as you're willing to write, as long as you're willing to keep writing, and then be willing to do a little bit of research. Like the research for novel writing is fun because it's stuff that you're clearly interested in anyway.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that like people should be excited about, like taking a workshop because of how interesting that stuff is.
Oh yeah. Well, the rabbit hole of research, especially in historical fiction, it's both fantastic and truly a dangerous place because you can end up researching for years and not really get around to the book. But
like my favorite thing to joke with my author friends about is like who are historical fiction or like nonfiction writers. I'll be like, so when do you know when to stop? And they're like, I don't. I just start writing and hope I don't know when to stop researching because I always want to do more of that. Yeah,
exactly. And then they find something out about the art, your area of research after the fact, and you're like, oh no, do I have to change everything? So actually, the woman there's two burials that my main character Akmaral is based on, but one of the burials they recently found out that she died not from battle wounds but from cancer, and I'm like, oh, but it's okay because the other one definitely was a warrior. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to ignore that and use that for a talking point. But then I'm like, I could write a whole nother story about the cancer woman. Okay, we can do that. No, not this week.
Like, file that away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So last question. I always end each discussion by having the author give a recommendation of any kind. It can be a book. It can be a TV show. It could be a place you think people should visit or a food they should eat. Like anything you want to recommend, the floor is yours.
Okay. I am a passionate hiker, and I have a small stretch of the, woods in a park up the hill from me. And almost every day I go out hiking, and I only go 3 or 4 miles because I have to get back here and get to work. But I recommend that everybody, no matter how disinclined, spend some time in nature. And ideally in some place that is less than civilized, as in not just a park, but like in the woods on a trail, or if you live in the desert, go out into the desert, or wherever you live, stand by the ocean. Nature is not just obviously the world around us, but it is where we come from. We are nature too. And I think that as writers, to still the busy brain of all the things we have to do to survive in our lives and to get our work done, you have to step away from the construct that humanity has put on the world and remember where you come from and listen to the whispers in the leaves and the wind and the trees and the ocean. And you'll find voices speaking to you if you do that on a regular basis.
As an avid hiker with my senior dog who's sleeping peacefully next to me, I wholeheartedly agree. That's such a perfect one. This was So delightful, so informative. Again, as a reminder, everyone, links in the show notes. I will make sure you're all aware of where you can find the Writers Circle links so you can go check it out. Judith, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
Passions and Prologues is proud to be an evergreen podcast and was created by Adam Sokol. It was produced by Adam Sokol and Sean Rule Hoffman. And if you are interested in this podcast and any other evergreen podcast, you can go to evergreenpodcast.com to discover all the different stories we have to tell.